Here comes Mike, spikes in. He leads to the right hand. Down he goes.
Dude, he was prison jacked.
Oh, there it is, right hand to the head, and ATN stop. Uppercut to the body by Tyson. Again, a double right hand.
3 years had passed since Mike Tyson was taken away from boxing. The former heavyweight champion was no longer living under the bright lights. He was serving a 6-year prison sentence in Indiana. Tyson had been convicted in 1992 and sentenced to prison. By the time he was released, the boxing world had changed. New champions had taken positions that once belonged to him. The man who had ruled the heavyweight division was now watching from the outside. But on March 25, 1995, everything changed. Tyson walked out of the Indiana Youth Center. He was only 28 years old. He had already become the youngest heavyweight champion in boxing history. Now he was returning to a sport that had continued without him. Nobody could know exactly what version of Mike Tyson would appear. Nobody could know whether the years away had taken his power away. But the boxing world was about to find out. Tyson had not fought professionally since June 1991. His last fight before prison had been against Donovan Ruddock. He had won that fight by unanimous decision. Then his life changed completely. His prison sentence removed him from boxing during his physical prime. 3 years is a long time for any heavyweight fighter. Timing can disappear when a fighter stays away from competition. Reflexes can change. Confidence can change. Even a fighter who once looked unbeatable can come back differently. But Tyson's name had not disappeared. If anything, his absence had made the public more curious. People wanted to know what would happen when he finally returned. Promoters knew there was enormous interest in seeing him fight again, and Tyson himself wanted another chance to rebuild his career. The first test was already waiting. That first opponent was Peter McNeeley. McNeeley was known as an aggressive heavyweight. He was not a former world champion. He was not considered one of the best heavyweights in the division, but he was willing to accept the opportunity. The fight was scheduled for August 19, 1995. The location was the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas. The event was promoted around the simple message that Tyson was back. The attention was enormous. The public wanted to see whether the old Tyson was still there. McNeeley had spoken confidently before the fight, but once the bell rang, there was no more talking. McNeeley rushed forward. Tyson met him with speed and power. The first knockdown came almost immediately. McNeeley got back up and tried to continue. Then Tyson attacked again. Tyson dropped McNeeley for a second time. McNeeley's manager jumped into the ring. The referee stopped the fight. The official result was a disqualification victory for Tyson. The entire comeback had lasted only 89 seconds. After more than 3 years away, Tyson had won. It was not a long performance. It was not enough to prove that Tyson was completely back, but it answered one important question. His power had not disappeared. The crowd had come to see Iron Mike return. They had barely settled into their seats before the fight was finished. Tyson had not needed a long fight to remind everyone of his danger. The comeback had begun in the most dramatic way possible. But the next fight would tell us more, because one quick victory could not erase 3 years of inactivity. Tyson still had to prove himself against stronger opposition. The next opponent was Buster Mathis Jr. This was a very different challenge. Mathis entered the fight undefeated. He was bigger than Tyson and had a reputation for being difficult to deal with. The fight took place on December 16, 1995. It was held at the Spectrum in Philadelphia. This time, Tyson did not get an immediate finish. Mathis used his size and clinching to make the fight uncomfortable. He repeatedly stayed close to Tyson. That prevented him from getting the distance he wanted for his punches. It was one of the clearest signs that Tyson still had ring rust. He had power, he had aggression, but his rhythm was not perfect. For several minutes, Mathis made him work. Eventually, Tyson found a way to create space, and when he did, the fight changed immediately. Tyson stepped away from Mathis. He created enough room to use his right hand. Then he landed. Mathis went down. He could not beat the count. The fight ended at 2 minutes and 32 seconds of the third round. Tyson had won his second comeback fight. But this victory revealed more than the first one. The Washington Post reported that Tyson showed significant ring rust. He was trying to overwhelm Mathis rather than patiently box. That was important. The old Tyson had been known for explosive movement and combinations. This version was relying heavily on pressure and power. Still, the result was another knockout. Tyson was now 2 fights into his comeback. Both had ended in victories. The next opponent would be much more important. Frank Bruno was waiting, and Bruno was not just another challenger. Frank Bruno already knew what it felt like to fight Tyson. The two men had met in 1989. Tyson had stopped Bruno in the 5th round, but 6 years had passed since that first meeting. Bruno had continued his career. He eventually captured the WBC Heavyweight Championship. Now, Tyson was coming back for that championship. The fight was scheduled for March 16, 1996. The MGM Grand in Las Vegas would host the contest. This was the first real championship test of Tyson's comeback. A victory would mean more than another knockout. It would mean Tyson had climbed back to the top. A defeat would raise serious questions about whether his comeback had gone too far. Bruno had size. Bruno had experience. Bruno also had something Tyson wanted badly: the WBC heavyweight title. The fight began with both men knowing exactly what was at stake. Bruno tried to use his physical advantages. Tyson worked to get inside. That was where Tyson had always been most dangerous. He did not want to stay at the end of Bruno's punches. He wanted to close the distance. He wanted to attack from close range. The early rounds were competitive. Bruno was not simply standing in front of him, but Tyson continued to pressure him. The closer Tyson got, the more difficult the fight became for Bruno. Tyson began finding openings. His punches started landing with more authority. Bruno struggled under the pressure. Then Tyson moved in again. The attack became too much, and the championship fight was about to end. In the 3rd round, Tyson finished the fight. The referee stopped Bruno. Tyson had won by technical knockout. The official result came in the 3rd round. The WBC Heavyweight Championship was now back with Mike Tyson. Think about the journey. Only months earlier, Tyson had been inside prison. Now he was a world heavyweight champion again. He had returned to professional boxing at 28. He had fought 3 times since his release. He had won all 3. And now he had regained a major world title. This was not a fictional comeback. It was happening in front of millions of people. Tyson had gone from prison to heavyweight champion again. The story was already extraordinary, but Tyson was not finished. The next target was Bruce Seldon. Seldon held the WBA Heavyweight Championship. That meant another major title was within Tyson's reach. The fight took place on September 7, 1996. Once again, the MGM Grand in Las Vegas hosted Tyson. This time, Tyson was already a champion. He wanted another belt. Seldon had the opportunity to stop the comeback. Tyson had the opportunity to add another championship. The atmosphere was different from the McNeeley fight. There was no longer a question about whether Tyson could return. He had already done that. There was now a question about how far the comeback could go. Could Tyson become a multiple belt heavyweight champion again? Could he continue rebuilding the career that had been interrupted? The bell was about to provide the answer.
Seldon tried to box. Tyson pressed forward. The fight did not last long. Tyson knocked Seldon down twice. The referee stopped the contest. The official result was a 1st-round technical knockout. Mike Tyson had won the WBA Heavyweight Championship. In a little more than a year after his release, he had returned to the top. He had defeated Peter McNeeley. He had defeated Buster Mathis Jr. He had defeated Frank Bruno. He had defeated Bruce Seldon. The comeback had gone from curiosity to championship reality. Tyson was once again holding major heavyweight titles. But there was a problem. The biggest challenge of his comeback had not arrived yet. His name was Evander Holyfield. Holyfield was different from the opponents Tyson had faced since prison. He was a former undisputed cruiserweight champion. He had also become a heavyweight champion. He had experience against elite opposition. He was not simply there to help Tyson rebuild his career. Holyfield believed he could beat him. The fight was scheduled for November 9, 1996. The two men met in Las Vegas. Tyson entered as the WBA heavyweight champion. Holyfield had other plans. From the opening rounds, Holyfield refused to give Tyson easy opportunities. He stayed composed under pressure. He fought physically. He made Tyson work. The fight became much harder than Tyson's previous comeback contests. Tyson's power was still dangerous, but Holyfield was not going to stand still and allow Tyson to control the fight. Slowly, the balance began to change. Holyfield knocked Tyson down in the 6th round. Tyson got back up. He continued fighting, but Holyfield kept pressing. The rounds continued to move in Holyfield's favor. Tyson had moments, but he was no longer controlling the fight. By the 11th round, Holyfield had done enough to force the referee to intervene. Mitch Halpern stopped the contest. Holyfield won by technical knockout. Tyson had lost. The comeback had reached its first major wall. Only months earlier, Tyson had regained the WBC championship. Then he had added the WBA title. Now one of those championships was gone. The loss did not erase what Tyson had achieved, but it showed that the heavyweight division had fighters capable of challenging him. And the biggest controversy of his comeback was still ahead. The rematch with Holyfield happened on June 28, 1997. This time, the story became one of the most controversial in boxing. Tyson was trying to regain the title. Holyfield was trying to prove the first victory was no accident. The fight lasted 3 rounds. During the 3rd round, Tyson bit Holyfield. The referee stopped the fight. Tyson was disqualified. The incident shocked the boxing world. It was not a knockout. It was not a decision. It was a disqualification. Tyson had lost the fight because of his actions. The Nevada State Athletic Commission responded strongly. His boxing license was revoked. He was also fined $3 million. For the 2nd time since prison, Tyson's career was suddenly outside the ring. That moment changed the direction of Tyson's career. The comeback that had looked unstoppable was now surrounded by controversy. But Tyson was not permanently banned from boxing. He eventually applied to have his license restored. In October 1998, the Nevada State Athletic Commission voted to reinstate him. The vote was 4-1. Tyson was once again allowed to fight professionally. He had spent another period away from competition, but this time the reason was not prison. It was the punishment that followed the Holyfield rematch. Tyson now had another chance. The question was whether he could control himself and rebuild again. His first opponent after reinstatement was Francois Botha. Botha was a serious heavyweight. He was not there to play a supporting role in Tyson's comeback. He wanted to defeat him.
The Tyson and Botha fight took place on January 16, 1999. Botha gave Tyson problems. He was strong. He was confident. He did not simply walk into Tyson's punches. For much of the fight, Tyson struggled to find his best rhythm. Botha was doing enough to make Tyson work. Then the 5th round arrived. Tyson was still searching for the opening. The clock was running down. Botha was ahead on the judges' scorecards at that stage. Then Tyson landed the punch that changed everything. A powerful right hand connected. Botha went down. He attempted to get back to his feet, but he could not continue safely. The referee stopped the contest. Tyson had won by knockout in the 5th round. That victory was important for another reason. It showed that Tyson could still produce a fight-changing punch. He did not dominate every second. He did not look exactly like the young champion, but he remained dangerous until the final moment. That became one of the clearest patterns of his later career. Tyson could struggle. Tyson could lose rounds, but an opening could still change everything. The Botha fight was another chapter in that story. It also showed why the post-prison Tyson should not be described as simply unbeatable. He was not. He had weaknesses. He had lost to Holyfield. He had struggled against Mathis. He had struggled against Botha. But he still had extraordinary power. That power continued to keep him relevant, and Tyson continued moving forward. If you're enjoying this documentary, subscribe to Punch Theory. There are many boxing stories that deserve to be told properly. Not through rumors, not through invented moments, but through what actually happened. Tyson's story is powerful enough without adding anything that never happened. The prison release was real. The comeback was real. The championships were real. The defeats were real. The controversies were real. And the knockouts were real. That is what makes this story worth remembering, because the truth is already dramatic. Tyson did not need a fictional transformation to become fascinating. He simply needed to step back into the ring. And once he did, the entire boxing world started watching again. The next chapters would make that comeback even more complicated. By 2000, Tyson was still fighting. He was no longer holding the major championships he had regained, but his name remained one of the biggest in boxing. His next notable opponent was Andrew Golota. The fight took place on October 20th, 2000. Golota was a former heavyweight contender with a reputation for physical and controversial fights. Tyson came forward aggressively. Golota was knocked down during the fight, but the contest did not end like a normal Tyson victory. Golota refused to continue after the second round. The initial result was a Tyson victory by technical knockout. Later, however, Tyson tested positive for marijuana. The result was changed to a no contest. That distinction matters. A documentary about Tyson should not call it a clean, official victory. The record was changed, and the facts should remain the facts. That fight shows why Tyson's later career needs careful storytelling. The highlight might show Golota leaving the ring, but the official record tells a more complicated story. Tyson's original victory was changed to no contest. This is exactly why punch theory should separate the footage from the final record. Boxing history is not just about what happened inside the ring. It is also about what happened afterward. The same thing had already happened with Tyson's Holyfield rematch. The official consequences mattered. The record mattered. The decisions of boxing commissions mattered. And the truth matters. Tyson continued fighting despite all of these complications. He faced more opponents. He continued looking for victories. He was no longer trying to become the same young champion. He was trying to extend a career that had already taken several unexpected turns, and his most explosive late career knockout was still coming.
That opponent was Clifford Etienne. The fight took place on February 22, 2003. Tyson was 36 years old. He had already gone through prison, he had already become champion again, he had already lost major fights, he had already been suspended, he had already returned. Now he was facing another heavyweight. Etienne came into the fight with confidence, but Tyson did not need many opportunities. The first round began. Tyson moved forward. He found the opening. Then his right hand landed. Etienne went down. The referee counted. Etienne could not continue. The fight was over. The official time was 49 seconds. That knockout became the final knockout victory of Tyson's professional career. It was not the end of his career. Tyson would fight again, but he would never again record another professional knockout victory. That makes the Etienne fight an important part of the story. The man who had built his reputation on devastating knockouts had produced one more. But the Tyson of 2003 was very different from the Tyson who became champion at 20. He was older, he had taken years of punishment, his career had been interrupted repeatedly. His greatest years were behind him. Still, the power remained. One punch was enough. That had been the theme of Tyson's career for years. And against Etienne, the theme appeared one final time. So, was the version of Tyson after prison the scariest version ever? The answer depends on what you mean by scary. If you mean the most complete boxer, the answer is probably the young champion. The Tyson of the late 1980s had speed, movement, combinations, and confidence. He was destroying elite heavyweights before they could settle into fights. The post-prison Tyson was different. He was older, he had ring rust, his career had been interrupted, his public image had become much more complicated, but there was something frightening about the uncertainty around him. Nobody knew exactly what would appear when he walked into the ring. Sometimes he looked rusty, sometimes he looked devastating, sometimes he struggled. Then, suddenly, one punch could end everything. That unpredictability became part of his identity after prison, and that is a more accurate way to describe the comeback. The prison release did not magically create a better Mike Tyson. There is no need to invent a story about that. The facts are already extraordinary. He walked out of prison in March 1995. 5 months later, he returned to professional boxing. He stopped Peter McNeeley in 89 seconds. He stopped Buster Mathis Jr. in the 3rd round. He stopped Frank Bruno in the 3rd round. That victory gave him the WBC Heavyweight Championship. 6 months later, he stopped Bruce Seldon. That victory gave him the WBA Heavyweight Championship. He had gone from prison to holding major heavyweight titles again. Then Holyfield stopped him. Then the rematch ended in disqualification. Then his license was revoked. Then his license was restored. Then Tyson returned again. That is the real comeback story. There is another important detail. Tyson's comeback was not one perfect straight line. It had setbacks, it had controversy, it had ring rust, it had championship victories, it had major defeats, it had another suspension, it had another return. That is why calling him unstoppable after prison would be inaccurate. He was not unstoppable. Holyfield proved that. Mathis showed that he could be made uncomfortable. Botha showed that he could be outboxed for stretches. But Tyson remained dangerous. His power never stopped being a major part of his threat. That is why opponents could never completely relax. Even when Tyson was losing rounds, the danger remained. One opening could change the fight. One mistake could end the night. And that is exactly what happened to Botha and Etienne.
The most interesting part of Tyson's comeback may be how quickly he reached the championship again. He was released from prison in March 1995. His first comeback fight came in August. His second came in December. His third came in March 1996. That third fight was for a world title. Tyson stopped Bruno in the 3rd round. Then he waited 6 months. He faced Bruce Seldon. He stopped Seldon in the 1st round. Suddenly, Tyson was holding 2 major heavyweight championships. That happened less than 18 months after his release. The numbers tell the story better than exaggeration ever could. 4 comeback fights, 4 victories, 2 major championship victories. Then came Holyfield. That was where the limits of the comeback became clear. The return had been spectacular, but boxing had not stopped evolving while Tyson was away. And this is where the story becomes bigger than one fighter. Tyson's return showed how difficult it is to rebuild a career after years away. The public remembered the young champion. The ring demanded the fighter standing in front of the opponent. Those were not always the same person. The younger Tyson had developed into a complete heavyweight. The later Tyson relied more heavily on his power. That did not make him harmless. It simply made him different. He could still produce spectacular finishes, but elite opponents could also expose weaknesses. Holyfield did exactly that. Later fighters did too. That is why the post-prison era should not be remembered as one long reign of destruction. It was a period of highs and lows. It was a period of rebuilding. It was a period of controversy. And above all, it was a period when Tyson kept trying to find his place in boxing again. The first night back against McNeeley remains the perfect opening scene. The prison years were over, the cameras were everywhere, the crowd was waiting. McNeeley came forward. Tyson answered. The fight ended in 89 seconds. That was the beginning. Then came Mathis. Tyson had to work harder. Then came Bruno. Tyson became champion again. Then came Seldon. Tyson added another major belt. Then came Holyfield. The comeback suddenly looked less certain. Then came the controversial rematch. Tyson was disqualified. His license disappeared. Then it returned. Then came Botha. Tyson found another knockout. Then came Golota. The initial victory became a no contest. Then came Etienne, another first-round knockout. This was not a perfect comeback. It was a complicated one. That is why the real Tyson story is more interesting than the internet version. You do not need to say that prison turned him into a superhuman. You do not need to claim that he became unbeatable. You do not need to invent stories about his body.
You do not need to create conversations that never happened. The verified timeline is already unbelievable. A former undisputed heavyweight champion spent years away from boxing. He returned. He won. He regained the WBC championship. He captured the WBA championship. He lost to Holyfield. He was suspended. He returned again. He continued fighting for several more years. He produced some spectacular knockouts, and eventually his professional career came to an end. That is enough. The truth has more than enough drama, and that is exactly how a boxing documentary should tell it. When Tyson walked out of prison, nobody could predict the next chapter. There was no guarantee he would become champion again. There was no guarantee his timing would return. There was no guarantee that his body would hold up. There was no guarantee that the public would accept him. But Tyson stepped back into the ring anyway. He fought McNeeley, then Mathis, then Bruno, then Seldon. Each fight answered another question. Could he still win? Could he still handle pressure? Could he still beat a world champion? Could he still compete at the highest level? For a while, the answer was yes. Then Holyfield showed the limits. That defeat did not erase the comeback. It simply added another chapter. Tyson's story was never simple. That is why people are still talking about it decades later.
If you have made it this far, subscribe to Punch Theory. We are not here to turn boxing history into fiction. We are here to tell the stories behind the punches. Tyson's prison comeback is one of those stories. It contains victory, it contains defeat, it contains controversy, it contains redemption, it contains mistakes, and it contains some of the most memorable knockouts of his career. But the biggest lesson is simple. A comeback does not mean returning to exactly who you were. Sometimes it means finding another way to compete. Tyson was not the same fighter after prison. He did not need to be. He still became champion again. He still produced major victories, and he still left an enormous mark on heavyweight boxing. That is what makes the story worth remembering. In the end, the question is not whether prison created the scariest Mike Tyson. The evidence does not support that simple claim. The younger Tyson was arguably the more complete fighter, but the post-prison Tyson had something else. He had a story that made every fight feel bigger. He had already lost years of his career. He had already lost his freedom. He had already watched the heavyweight division move forward. Then he came back. He fought. He won. He became champion again. He lost. He returned again. He kept fighting. And even when the career was no longer what it once was, his punches could still change a fight instantly. That is the truth. Not a myth, not an internet legend, a real fighter with an extraordinary comeback. And that comeback began the moment the prison gates opened. March 25, 1995 was the beginning of a completely different chapter. Mike Tyson walked out of prison. Months later, he walked into a boxing ring. Peter McNeeley stood across from him. 89 seconds later, the fight was over. Buster Mathis Jr. came next. Then Frank Bruno. Then Bruce Seldon. The former champion had climbed back to the top, but the story did not end there. Holyfield stopped him. The rematch ended in disqualification. His license was revoked. His license was later restored. He returned again. He fought Botha. He fought Galota. He fought many more opponents. And in 2003, Clifford Etienne became the final man he knocked out as a professional. That entire journey began with one simple moment. The prison gates opened, and Mike Tyson walked back into the world. So when the highlights play again, remember what happened between them. Remember that Tyson had been away for years. Remember that he had to rebuild his career. Remember that the first victory lasted only 89 seconds. Remember that Mathis exposed ring rust. Remember that Bruno gave Tyson another world championship. Remember that Seldon gave him another major belt. Remember that Holyfield exposed the limits of the comeback.
Remember that the second Holyfield fight changed Tyson's career again. Remember that Botha nearly took him into deeper waters before one punch changed everything. Remember that the Golota result was later changed to no contest. Remember that Etienne fell in the first round. Remember that the facts are more powerful than the myths. This was Mike Tyson after prison. Not invincible, not fictional, not perfect, but still dangerous enough to climb back to the top of heavyweight boxing. And maybe that is why this version of Mike Tyson still fascinates boxing fans. He was not simply trying to win fights. He was trying to rebuild a life and a career in public. Every opponent became another test. Every victory created another headline. Every defeat created another question. Every controversy changed the conversation. But Tyson kept coming back. That is the part that should never be lost in the mythology. The comeback was not perfect. It was not permanent, but it was real. From prison in March 1995 to the WBC championship in March 1996, the transformation happened through actual fights. Then he added the WBA title in September. The run ended against Holyfield, but the story continued for years afterward. That is why the night Tyson was released remains such an important moment in boxing history. It was not the end of the Tyson story. It was the beginning of another one.
The scariest version of Mike Tyson may not be the one with the most muscles. It may not be the one with the loudest entrance. It may not even be the one with the fastest knockout. The most fascinating version was the fighter nobody knew how to measure. He had been away. He had lost time. He had returned. He was carrying enormous expectations, and he still had the ability to end a fight with one clean punch. That combination made every comeback fight feel unpredictable. Sometimes the old brilliance appeared, sometimes the weaknesses appeared, but the danger was always there. That is why McNeeley lasted 89 seconds. That is why Bruno lost the WBC title. That is why Seldon lost the WBA title. That is why Botha could be winning and still lose in an instant. And that is why Tyson's post-prison career remains one of boxing's most fascinating chapters. Mike Tyson did not leave prison and become a different species. He left prison and became a fighter trying to rebuild. The world expected something extraordinary. Tyson delivered part of it. He became champion again. But he also lost. He made mistakes. He faced consequences. He returned. He fought again. That is what makes the story human. It also makes it believable. The man who walked out of prison was not guaranteed another championship. He earned it through fights. He earned it against Bruno. He added another belt against Seldon. Then Holyfield showed that the road would not stay easy. The career continued through more victories and more setbacks. Eventually, the professional chapter came to an end, but the comeback remained. It became part of boxing history, and it all started with that walk through the prison gates. This is why the title of this story carries so much weight. The night Tyson was released was not the night he became champion. It was not the night he knocked someone out. It was the night his second boxing life became possible. Everything that followed came afterward. McNeeley, Mathis, Bruno, Seldon, Holyfield, Botha, Golota, Etienne. Each name represents another part of the journey. Some ended in victory, some ended in defeat, some ended in controversy, but together they created the story of Tyson after prison, a story that cannot be understood through one highlight. You have to follow the entire road. You have to see the comeback. You have to see the setbacks. You have to see the consequences. And then you understand why Mike Tyson remains one of the most fascinating fighters boxing has ever produced. If this story kept you watching, subscribe to Punch Theory, because the next boxing story may be even deeper. We will keep going beyond the highlights. We will look at the opponents. We will look at the fights. We will look at the moments that changed careers. And most importantly, we will separate boxing history from boxing mythology. Mike Tyson's prison comeback does not need exaggeration. The facts are already powerful. 3 years away. A return at 28, 4 comeback victories, a return to world championship status, a devastating loss to Holyfield, a controversial rematch, a suspension, another return, more knockouts,
and eventually the end of his professional career. That is not a fictional story. That is Mike Tyson's real journey, and it began when those prison gates finally opened.
The final image is simple. A prison gate opens. A former heavyweight champion walks out. The boxing world waits. Months later, the gloves go on. The lights come up. Peter McNeeley charges forward. Tyson answers. The fight ends. Then another opponent arrives. Then another. Then another. Soon, the man who had been away from boxing is holding a world championship again. For a moment, it looks like the old Tyson has returned completely. But Holyfield proves otherwise. The later years prove even more. Tyson was not invincible. He was not unstoppable. He was a fighter who kept returning despite everything around him. And that may be the most important part of the story. The scariest thing was not that Mike Tyson became something supernatural. It was that after losing so much time, he still found a way back to the top. Mike Tyson's comeback after prison remains extraordinary because every major part of it can be verified. He was released on March 25, 1995. He returned against Peter McNeeley on August 19. He won in 89 seconds. He stopped Buster Mathis Jr. in December. He stopped Frank Bruno in March 1996. He won the WBC Heavyweight Championship. He stopped Bruce Seldon in September. He won the WBA Championship. He then faced Evander Holyfield. Holyfield stopped him in the 11th round. Their rematch ended in disqualification. Tyson's license was revoked. It was later restored. He returned against Francois Botha. He scored another major knockout. Later, his fight with Andrew Golota became a no contest. Then he stopped Clifford Etienne in 49 seconds. That is the story. No invented scenes, no fake quotes, no impossible claims. Just Mike Tyson and one of the most remarkable comeback chapters in heavyweight boxing. And that is where we leave Iron Mike. Not inside the prison, not at the moment of his greatest controversy, not only at the moment of his greatest victory, but at the beginning of the comeback that changed the second half of his career. The prison gates opened. Tyson walked out. The boxing world waited. He stepped back into the ring. He won. He became champion again. He lost. He returned again. He kept fighting. His story became more complicated with every year, but the fascination never disappeared, because Tyson's career was never only about winning. It was about what happened after losing. It was about what happened after falling. It was about whether a fighter could return. And Mike Tyson returned more than once. That is why the night he was released still matters. It was the beginning of the Mike Tyson story that boxing would never forget. This is Punch Theory.
Marvis must move or we're going to be out of here very, very quickly.